Hey everyone, it's Audrey. Today I'm going to be going over the process of constructing a publication or editorial report. Um, so the process I'll be explaining today is the beginning stages before you even get to the part where you're designing. Because this is really important if you're a freelancer or any type of designer, where the foundation of every project comes from the communication and the planning stages before the design, because that's going to help you execute the best design possible. And where this usually starts is a client contacts you and they say, hey, I have this project. I want to do an annual report. And where do we begin? Usually how I handle it, if it's a new client, I send them to my client intake form, which leads them through the process of just getting the basic information down about the project and then setting up a phone call to discuss. Usually it's a 30-minute phone call to discuss the preliminary of the project and get to know the client a little bit more. If it's a client I've worked with for a long time and have a really good relationship with, usually they already understand to send me a good majority of the details. And sometimes I'll just have a 15-minute conversation to just chat about what their goals are for the new report. And then from there, after I've had the meetings, I'll move into doing a project proposal or with a quote or an estimate. And these two look a little bit different based on if it's a new client or an old client. My new client, I'm going to show them an example of a past report. I'm going to go through the process of how I like to research the project, the stages of communication, when I'll be sending a contract, just more of a timeline of, hey, this is the way I work, and how I like to stay organized in just setting expectations of what it's like working with a designer. And a project proposal for my returning client usually is pretty simple. Usually it's just a estimate or a quote where I outline all of the details that they sent me. Sometimes I have to request additional information, so usually I like to have images, stock art, a past report that is similar to the report they want to do for this round, just so I have an idea of what branding they've done before, what was a previous look, and what type of audience they've reached out to. And then I like to see a full document of text, and it must be seen by an editor before I begin to work on it. So that's usually project proposal and estimate really just helps clarify the project for everyone. And then I will send them a quote with my expectation of payment and how payment is structured. And a lot of times I like to have clients reach out to me between 6 months to 3 months before their deadline. So let's say that their deadline is in December. The earliest I want them to reach out to me is going to be in June. The latest I want them to reach out to me is going to be September. And this is mainly because the initial process of developing this report, there's a lot of communication that happens in the beginning, and that's what I'm discussing now, is that there's so much that needs to come down in terms of planning and organizing the actual project to make sure that when I do start designing, everything is laid out. And then a lot of the clients I work with have a budget they work within, and it's mainly they reach out to me to make sure that I'm within their budget and they can pay me fairly. That's usually usually why I do project proposals first. And then after doing a lot of communication, sometimes we'll have an extra phone call to discuss the project proposal, and there might be some negotiation in terms of the quote or the estimate, especially if someone's working within a budget. So sometimes we will need a meeting to kind of discuss details a little bit more to see how we can make it work for both parties. And then that's when I introduce a contract. And the whole point of a contract is just clarifying each party's duties, my duties as the designer and their duties as the client, of what the expectations are and how we're on the same page. And in the contract, I'm not trying to hide anything. I want them to read the entire contract. And a lot of times my client needs to send that contract to their legal team. So usually within the timeline of the project, I like to leave 2 to 3 weeks open for them to have the contract reviewed. If it needs to be edited, their team can reach out to me and say, hey, we want to edit this part of the contract. And I'm perfectly open to that. There just needs to be open communication for that to happen. And it also sets up the expectation that within the contract, there's a set timeline and set amount of edits. And usually within that contract, I give a little bit of buffer, but it's usually an additional fee that if we go beyond this project, it's going to be X amount more. Or if we go beyond, say, 3 edits, it's going to be X amount more, because they're stretching the timeline beyond what we agreed on. And it just makes sure that I'm compensated fairly for doing extra work. And all of my clients are well aware of this before they sign it. And sometimes I'll even have a meeting with them or their legal team that goes over the contract to make sure that everything is well understood. And then and another thing, with the contract, I ask all my clients to pay me 50% upfront, because a lot of these projects can be 2 months long of designing. And I don't want to be paid at the end of that project. Since I am a freelancer and we're kind of project to project, I don't get a weekly salary or every 2-week salary or something like that. It's almost like I get paid monthly. So for me, just to be able to live life, buy groceries, have necessities, I require a 50% upfront fee. And with some of my clients, they have a 30-day payment period. So with the signature of the contract, I need a signed document or proof that they have sent the request in, so I can be paid within that 30-day period before I start that project. And sometimes that timeline is a little bit different. If it's a rush order. Usually I won't take a rush order if it's a new client. Usually I will only take a rush order if it's an existing client where I have rapport and I do trust them and know they pay me on time. And sometimes I won't be paid till the end of the project. But that's a decision I make as a designer. But once the contract is signed, once I see proof of payment for that 50% upfront fee, sometimes there can be a waiting period in between where they're having an editor look at the text and making sure that it's all correct. Sometimes they're adding a couple final assets before sending me everything to start designing. But once I have all those assets, they'll reach out to me. And I like to create a sample for all of my clients. It doesn't matter if it's a 50-page report or it's over 200 pages. Every client I have is going to receive some sort of a sample, because a sample sets up what the full report is going to look like. I don't want to create a full report, go through the branding of it, the theme, the typography, infographics, everything like that, and then have them turn around and say, you know, Audrey, I really don't like the design. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. So it's really important to give samples to your clients. And usually my samples are 8 to 12 pages long that basically walk through the theme, the typography, the hierarchy and layout, what infographics are going to look like, an idea of a cover, and depending on the client's budget, I like to do at least 2 samples that give them different options. Because, for example, I just finished up a report for an Indigenous organization, and I had to do a lot of research for that organization as I'm not a part of that community, and I didn't want to appropriate any of the information. So I had to do a lot of research, and I provided 2 different samples based on the research I conducted about their organization, to make sure that my branding was consistent, and just to give them 2 different options, because it was actually 4 organizations together. So I was like providing 2 different options because one might be a little bit more in line with their goals and objective and branding than the other. And I usually don't do edits on the samples, depending on how large the budget is. I'll usually do at least 1 round of edits on the sample. So of those 2 options, they pick 1 option and I'll do edits on that. And then from there, we solidify the idea of what the report is going to look like. And then I'll move into doing the full report. And for the full report, I usually only do 2 to 3 rounds of edits. I try and lean more towards 2 rounds of edits. 3 tends to be a buffer if their editor missed something with text, or just something was missed in terms of like hyperlinks or anything like that. Or they want to change an image because they didn't get approval, or just something odd. But usually in most of my contracts, I try and keep a hard deadline or hard objective of staying within 2 rounds of edits, just because when you're working on a 200+ page document and there just can be so many edits, that having to constantly go back and fix, it just starts to feel almost overwhelming and a little drawn out. And mistakes do happen. People do miss things. So that's why I usually I do allow 3 edits, but it should be like 1 or 2 things need to be fixed. But after edits happen, the document's ready to go out, everything's been finalized, the team's looked over it, everything looks great. I like to package the document. Most of my clients ask for both digital and print documents, so I'll create PDFs for digital use, and I like to link my table of contents to the entire PDF document, and then also have hyperlinks working. And then for my print document, I make sure it's print ready, crop marks and bleed, CMYK. All my images are 300 DPI, and I package it so that when they send it to the printer, they all have all the information they need. So that's kind of just a general overview of how I construct these reports. I know it's not a lot of fun just hearing how I do these, but as a freelancer, when I first started out, it was so hard to learn about these processes of beginning. Even when I did a tiny internship, it was just new dealing with all of the forefront stuff, just getting organized. And being as organized as possible will keep clients. That's something I've learned over time, is that the more organized you are, the more personable you are, the more clients will stay with you, the better rapport you'll have with clients. So I hope you learned a couple things and got some good tips from this video. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you have something to say, story to tell, please leave a comment. If you want to hear more of me rambling at this blank screen, you can hit that subscribe button, and I'm hopefully going to be posting more report videos. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, see you all later.